At exactly 9:42 this morning, you no longer have voting control of this company. The sentence echoed across the glass boardroom on Park Avenue. Nathaniel Rowe was still standing when the words landed. One hand on the polished table, the other gripping his Mont Blanc pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. Across from him, retired Judge Harold Bennett calmly adjusted his Rolex and slid a sealed document forward. This directive was activated upon Eleanor Rowe's death. Silence. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan moved as usual. Yellow taxis, the gray ribbon of Fifth Avenue, the distant line of Central Park. Inside, a kingdom collapsed without a single raised voice. Camille Brooks felt the blood drain from her face. Just last week, she had stood beside Nathaniel at a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel. Reporters flashing cameras, whispers already calling her the future Mrs. Rowe. Now the company's general counsel avoided eye contact. Nathaniel laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. That's impossible. Eleanor had no authority left. Judge Bennett's eyes did not soften. She had more than you ever understood. 3 hours earlier, Eleanor's funeral flowers were still fresh at St. Patrick's Cathedral. 3 newborns were asleep in a private neonatal suite, unaware their lives had just shifted the balance of a billion-dollar empire. Nathaniel reached for his iPhone. No signal inside the reinforced boardroom. Camille stepped closer. Nathaniel, what is he talking about? Bennett opened the folder. Your wife signed these documents at 2:17 a.m. the night before she went into labor. The air changed. A year ago, Eleanor had been gently removed from this very table for her health. 8 months pregnant with triplets, smiling politely, trusting her husband. Or so he thought. Nathaniel's voice lowered, dangerous. Read it. Bennett did, and with the first clause, Nathaniel realized something that made his chest tighten. Eleanor hadn't been preparing for motherhood. She had been preparing for war. 1 year earlier, Eleanor Rowe stood beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel, one hand resting gently over her still flat stomach. The ballroom shimmered in gold light. A string quartet played near the marble columns. Outside, horse-drawn carriages rolled along Central Park South. Inside, Manhattan's elite toasted to Whitman and Rowe Capital's newest expansion. 3 luxury towers rising along the San Francisco Bay. Nathaniel was in his element, not confident, polished, magnetic. He adjusted his cufflinks and stepped onto the stage, thanking investors, city officials, and my incredible wife Eleanor, who is the heart of everything we build. The applause was warm. Eleanor smiled, calm, graceful, wearing a midnight blue Dior gown Nathaniel had chosen himself. Reporters snapped photos as she stood beside him, the perfect image of legacy and stability. Then Camille Brooks approached. She had joined the company just 3 weeks earlier, recruited from a tech investment firm in Silicon Valley. 31. Sharp, ambitious, effortlessly poised in a tailored white gown. Mrs. Rowe? Camille said warmly, extending her hand. It's an honor. Nathaniel speaks highly of you. Her grip lingered a fraction too long. Eleanor noticed the way Nathaniel's voice shifted when he replied to Camille. Softer, slightly lowered, a private tone disguised as professional courtesy. Later that evening, Eleanor stepped away from the crowd to catch her breath near the terrace doors. The city air felt cooler there. Through the reflection in the glass, she saw something that tightened her chest. Nathaniel and Camille standing close. Too close. Not touching, but not distant enough. Camille laughed at something he said. Nathaniel leaned in, his hand briefly resting at the small of her back as a photographer passed. It was subtle, almost invisible. But wives know. When Nathaniel returned to Eleanor, he kissed her cheek. "You okay? You look tired." "I'm fine," she said gently. He squeezed her hand. "After the babies come, things will slow down. I promise." After the babies. It was the first time she heard him say it that way. Not our babies. Just the babies. That night, back in their penthouse overlooking Central Park, Eleanor sat alone on the edge of their bed. Nathaniel was in the shower. His iPhone rested on the nightstand, screen lighting up with a message. "Camille. Tonight was perfect." Eleanor didn't open it. She didn't need to. Instead, she placed her hand over her stomach and whispered something only she could hear. And for the first time in their marriage, she stopped feeling safe. 2 weeks after the gala, Eleanor sat alone in the quiet corner of a private lounge at the Ritz-Carlton in Manhattan. In front of her was a slim leather folder she had not opened in years. Their prenuptial agreement. When she and Nathaniel married, he had been ambitious but not yet powerful. Her father had insisted on legal clarity. At the time, Eleanor believed love made paperwork unnecessary. Now she understood paperwork was the only thing that survived love. She opened the document slowly. Clause after clause tightened around her like invisible wire. If they divorced, she would receive a fixed settlement, generous by normal standards, insignificant compared to the company's true valuation. Any appreciation in Whitman and Rowe Capital after the wedding belonged solely to Nathaniel. Her name was nowhere on controlling shares. Her board seat was conditional. Her financial authority? Revocable. She leaned back, steadying her breathing. Legally, she owned almost nothing, and she was 8 weeks pregnant with triplets. The waiter placed a cup of black coffee near her MacBook Air. She hadn't ordered it. Nathaniel must have called ahead. A thoughtful gesture. Or a reminder of who handled details now. Eleanor pulled up archived corporate filings. Years ago, before stepping back from operations, she had structured a series of minority holding companies under her maiden name. Whitman Holdings, LLC, small percentages, quiet placements. Harmless, Nathaniel had called them. He never noticed she had embedded veto rights into those minority positions. At the time, it was strategic caution. Now, it was survival. Her phone vibrated. Nathaniel. "Lunch running long. Don't wait up." She glanced at the time. 2:14 p.m. Through the lounge window, she saw a black Mercedes S-Class parked outside. Nathaniel's. Camille stepped out of the passenger side. They didn't see Eleanor inside. Camille adjusted her coat. Nathaniel's hand hovered at her waist, not quite touching. Professional distance. Personal closeness. Eleanor closed the prenup folder. If she filed for divorce now, she would lose leverage. If she confronted him, he would prepare. If she stayed quiet, she still had time. She opened a new document on her MacBook. Title, Irrevocable Family Trust. Draft. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. For years, she had protected Nathaniel's empire. Now, she would protect something else. And for the first time, she began planning not for marriage, but for the possibility that she might not survive childbirth. The ultrasound room was darker than she expected, lit mostly by the bluish light from the monitor. It made everything feel quieter than it really was. Eleanor lay back, trying not to tense up, fingers curled around the edge of the exam table. The technician moved the wand slowly across her stomach. On the screen, 3 small pulses blinked in steady rhythm. 3 heartbeats. It still startled her every time. Dr. Kaplan shifted his weight before speaking, the way doctors do when they're choosing their words carefully. Eleanor, carrying triplets at 36 already puts you in a high-risk group, he said gently. Your blood pressure hasn't been stable. We need to be ready for complications. Nathaniel glanced at his Apple Watch before looking up. What kind of complications? There's a real possibility of hemorrhage during delivery, Dr. Kaplan replied. We'll plan a C-section at 34 weeks, but I want you both to understand, the risk to you is significant. To you, not the babies. Eleanor kept her eyes on the screen. 3 tiny rhythms, steady and unaware. Nathaniel squeezed her hand. We'll have the best team in Manhattan, he said quickly. Whatever it costs. Dr. Kaplan gave a small, almost tired smile. This isn't about cost. The ride home felt longer than usual. Through the tinted windows of their Mercedes, Central Park was brushed with early frost. Parents pushed strollers. A man jogged past in headphones. Life going on as if nothing had shifted. Inside the car, neither of them spoke for several minutes. You're scaring yourself, Nathaniel said at last. High risk doesn't mean something bad will happen. Eleanor turned her head toward him. And if it does? He hesitated. Just a second. We'll deal with it, he said. Let's not spiral. Later that night, the nursery felt too perfect. 3 cribs, neutral wallpaper. Everything arranged by a designer who had never met her children. Eleanor sat in the rocking chair and opened her laptop. She pressed record. If you're watching this someday, she began quietly, it means I couldn't be there the way I wanted. Her voice wavered, but she kept going. She talked about being brave, about staying kind even when it's hard, about protecting what matters. She didn't say a word about her marriage. Halfway through, her phone buzzed on the dresser. Nathaniel. Running late, investor dinner. She glanced at the time. 8:53 p.m. A few minutes later, she saw Camille's post online. A photo at the River Cafe. Candlelight. Wine glasses. Caption, celebrating bold decisions. Eleanor stared at the screen for a long moment before closing the laptop. For the first time, she let herself think the thought she'd been avoiding. If she didn't make it, who would shape her children's world? It didn't explode all at once. There was no dramatic announcement, no public embarrassment. That almost would have been easier. Instead, it happened quietly. At 30 weeks pregnant, Eleanor's doctor told her to slow down. No travel, no high-stress meetings. Nathaniel didn't argue. In fact, he agreed a little too quickly. You need to rest, he said, brushing a kiss against her temple. Let Camille take the San Francisco meetings. Camille, not the senior partners, not the CFO who had been there for a decade. Camille. Within a few days, the shift became obvious. Emails started CCing her less, then not at all. Internal memos mentioned that Camille would represent Whitman and Rowe at the West Coast Investor Summit. Camille would handle media strategy. Camille would coordinate board communications during Eleanor's maternity leave. Maternity leave? Eleanor hadn't even had the babies yet. One afternoon, she watched a company luncheon livestream from the penthouse, her MacBook Air balanced carefully on her lap. Behind the stage hung a banner. Vision 2030. Leadership for the Future. Nathaniel stood at the podium, confident as always. Camille stood next to him. Close enough to look natural. Important. When a reporter asked about long-term leadership, Nathaniel smiled. We're building a team for the future. Strong minds, fresh perspective. The camera shifted to Camille. She looked composed, certain. By evening, industry blogs were already speculating. One headline popped up on Eleanor's screen. Is Camille Brooks the future of the firm? Eleanor shut the laptop before the applause ended. Later that night, she walked slowly through the nursery, one hand pressed against her lower back. 3 cribs waited under soft lighting. She had already chosen their names. She whispered them sometimes when she was alone. Laughter drifted down the hallway. Nathaniel's office door wasn't fully closed. Camille's voice carried first. Easy, comfortable. "After the babies are born, things will be simpler," she said. Nathaniel answered quietly, but Eleanor caught enough. "We just need to get through this." "Get through this?" She stepped back before the floor betrayed her. Back in the nursery, she eased into the rocking chair and let the tightness in her chest settle. Then she opened her laptop again, not to watch them, to protect what was hers. The night before the surgery, the apartment felt too quiet. Not peaceful. Just paused. Nathaniel was already asleep. He'd come home late, talking about Beverly Hills deals and critical expansion, then passed out almost instantly. His phone lay face down on the nightstand. No buzzing, no flashing screen. That alone felt strange. Eleanor stared at the ceiling for a while. At 34 weeks with triplets, sleep was never deep. But this wasn't about discomfort. Her body was heavy, yes. Her back ached. Still, that wasn't it. Her mind was clear, uncomfortably clear. She pushed herself up and walked slowly into the living room, one hand under her stomach. The city outside didn't care about any of this. Central Park was a dark shape under scattered lights. Traffic moved. Somewhere, someone laughed. On the coffee table sat the leather portfolio she'd been pretending not to notice all evening. She opened it. Pages she'd reread too many times. Judge Bennett's neat annotations in the margins. Legal language that didn't look emotional, but carried all of it underneath. Irrevocable. That word mattered. She opened her MacBook and skimmed the trust again. 51% consolidated. Voting power redirected. The children named clearly. Bennett as trustee. Conditions layered carefully. Infidelity, remarriage, executive authority. It wasn't dramatic on paper, just paragraphs, subsections. But it would burn everything down if it had to. Her phone lit up at 2:16 a.m., Camille's name. Eleanor didn't tap the screen. She didn't need confirmation of what she already knew. The lamp beside her threw a small pool of light over the last page. Her signature line waited. 2:17 a.m. She signed. Her hand didn't shake. That surprised her. She slid the papers back into the folder and sent one short email. "It's time. Activate upon confirmation. No long explanation. Bennett would understand." Down the hallway, the nursery door was cracked open. 3 cribs lined up in careful symmetry. Too neat. Too hopeful. Behind her, Nathaniel shifted in his sleep, unaware. He thought tomorrow was about becoming a father. He thought he was still in control. Eleanor closed the laptop and sat there a moment longer, listening to the city hum. If she walked into that operating room and didn't come back, they would not be left at anyone's mercy. The operating room was colder than Eleanor expected. Bright white lights hovered above her, too sharp to look at directly. Machines hummed in steady rhythm. A nurse adjusted the IV in her arm while another spoke softly about breathing. Nathaniel stood near her head, dressed in blue surgical scrubs, his expression carefully controlled. He squeezed her hand. "You're going to be fine," he said. She nodded. Behind the surgical curtain, she felt pressure but no pain. Voices moved quickly, clinical, focused. "Baby A is out." A thin cry pierced the air. Tears slipped from the corners of Eleanor's eyes before she realized she was crying. "Healthy?" someone confirmed. Seconds later, "Baby B." Another cry, stronger this time. Nathaniel exhaled sharply, almost laughing in relief. "Baby C coming?" The room shifted in energy, more urgency, more movement. Then, 3 cries, 3 lives announced to the world. Eleanor turned her head slightly, trying to see them. A nurse brought one baby close enough for her to glimpse a tiny face wrapped in pink knit. "They're perfect," the nurse whispered. "Perfect." Nathaniel leaned down and kissed Eleanor's forehead. "You did it." But something was wrong. The air changed again, not celebratory this time. Tighter. Dr. Kaplan's voice, no longer gentle. "Her blood pressure is dropping. I need more suction. Call for additional units." Nathaniel stiffened. "What's happening?" Eleanor felt a wave of cold move through her body, deeper than the room temperature. She tried to focus on the sound of the babies crying somewhere behind her. 3 cries. Hold on to that. Dr. Kaplan moved into her line of sight briefly. His eyes were calm, but urgent. "Eleanor, you're bleeding more than we anticipated. Stay with us." "Stay with us." She wanted to answer, but her mouth felt distant. Nathaniel's hand tightened around hers. "You're okay," he repeated. "You're okay." The lights above blurred slightly. The sounds became layered, machines, footsteps, instructions overlapping. Somewhere in the room, a nurse said, "Triplets are stable." Stable. That word reached her clearly. Her children were stable. Eleanor turned her head weakly toward where she believed Nathaniel stood. "Protect them?" she whispered. It was barely audible. His grip tightened. "Of course." But her eyes were already drifting. Monitors began to beep in sharper rhythm. Then longer. Then flat. 3 days later, the cathedral was filled with white lilies and controlled sorrow. St. Patrick's stood tall and indifferent against the gray Manhattan sky, its doors open to a line of black cars stretching down Fifth Avenue. Reporters stayed behind the barricades. This was meant to be private. Inside, the air carried incense and quiet whispers. Nathaniel sat in the front pew, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. His expression was solemn, practiced. Grief, but dignified. A man who had just lost his wife while welcoming 3 children into the world. Cameras would not see him today. Only the right people would. Behind him sat board members, investors, political figures, faces that had toasted him at the plaza only months earlier. Camille arrived 10 minutes late. She wore black, minimal jewelry, no makeup beyond what couldn't be avoided. She moved carefully, aware of every glance that followed her down the aisle. She did not sit beside Nathaniel, but she sat close enough. At the front, 3 small white bassinets rested near the altar, symbolic. The babies were still in the hospital's neonatal wing, too fragile for ceremony. The priest spoke about devotion, about sacrifice, about love that gives without asking. Nathaniel bowed his head at the right moments. When it was time for him to speak, he stepped forward slowly. "Eleanor was the heart of our family," he said, voice steady but heavy. "Everything we built together." A murmur of sympathy moved through the pews. Camille lowered her gaze. Near the back of the cathedral, Judge Harold Bennett stood alone, his expression unreadable. After the service ended, condolences came in waves, handshakes, embraces, promises of support. Nathaniel accepted them all. But just as the final guests began to leave, Bennett approached. "Nathaniel," he said quietly, "we need to convene the board this afternoon." Nathaniel blinked. "Today?" "Yes." Bennett's eyes were calm. Eleanor left specific instructions. "They take effect immediately." Nathaniel felt something shift beneath the surface of his grief. "Instructions?" he repeated. Bennett held his gaze. "Her will is to be read at 4 p.m. At exactly 4 p.m., the boardroom on Park Avenue filled in silence. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a pale winter sky. Fifth Avenue moved below as if nothing historic was about to happen 30 floors above it. Nathaniel sat at the head of the table. His seat. Camille sat 2 chairs to his right, hands folded, posture composed. She had changed into a charcoal gray suit. Professional, controlled, present. Board members avoided eye contact. Judge Harold Bennett entered last, carrying a slim leather folder. No theatrics. He took his place at the center of the table and opened the document. "This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Whitman Rowe," he began evenly. "Signed at 2:17 a.m. on the night prior to her scheduled delivery." Nathaniel shifted slightly. "We can review this privately," he said. "There's no need for a full board session." Bennett did not look up. "There is." He continued reading. "To my children, I leave the entirety of my consolidated holdings under Whitman Holdings, LLC, totaling 51% controlling interest in Whitman and Rowe Capital, to be placed in an irrevocable family trust." The room stilled. Nathaniel leaned forward. "That's not possible. She didn't have—" "She did," Bennett interrupted calmly. "The consolidation was executed before her death." Camille's eyes flickered toward Nathaniel. Bennett continued. "Primary trustee, Harold Bennett, until the beneficiaries reach the age of 18. A murmur rose from the far end of the table. Nathaniel's voice hardened. "As her husband, I retain voting authority." Bennett turned a page. Conditional clause. "In the event verified evidence of marital infidelity prior to Eleanor's death is presented, all voting rights previously assigned to Nathaniel Rowe shall immediately transfer to the trust." Silence fell like a dropped weight. Camille's breathing changed. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "That's absurd." Bennett placed a second folder on the table. "Supporting documentation is included." The room felt smaller. Outside, traffic continued without pause. Inside, an empire tilted. Nathaniel stared at the folder. And for the first time since Eleanor died, he realized this meeting was not about grief. It was about consequences. For a few long seconds, nobody touched the folder. It just sat there in the middle of the table, heavy and obvious. The kind of thing everyone sees but pretends not to. Nathaniel reached for it first. He tried to look relaxed about it, like this was all routine. But the tightness in his jaw gave him away. "This is being blown out of proportion," he muttered as he opened it. The contents spilled out in neat order. Hotel invoices, black car service records. Still images pulled from security footage. Screenshots of text messages, printed and dated. The Ritz-Carlton, the River Cafe, a small hotel in Beverly Hills. All neatly aligned with the same nights he'd claimed to be in strategy sessions. Camille sat very still. Her hands were clasped together in her lap, knuckles pale. "This doesn't prove anything," Nathaniel said, his voice sharper now. "Business dinners happen?" Bennett didn't react. "Keep going." Nathaniel flipped another page. The mood in the room shifted. A formal affidavit from a licensed private investigator. Signed, notarized, paid through one of Eleanor's holding entities months ago. It detailed overnight stays, witness observations, photos taken from discreet distances. The air felt thinner. One of the board members leaned forward slightly. "Nathaniel, is there context you'd like to provide?" For a split second, Nathaniel looked cornered. Then he straightened. "My personal life is not a corporate issue." "It becomes one," Bennett said calmly, "when it exposes the company to legal and reputational risk." Eleanor accounted for that. Camille finally spoke, her voice low. "She hired someone to follow us?" Bennett's expression didn't change. She prepared. Nathaniel turned on Camille without thinking. You told me this wouldn't surface. The words landed hard. The room went silent in a different way this time. Camille's eyes widened. Excuse me? A board member leaned back slowly. Wouldn't surface? Nathaniel seemed to realize what he'd just admitted. Bennett closed the folder. Effective immediately, your voting rights are suspended. Authority transfers to the Whitman Family Trust. Legal counsel gave a small nod. It's enforceable. Nathaniel stood up. You're making a mistake. No one stood with him, and Camille understood all at once that she had never been standing on solid ground at all. Nathaniel didn't go back to the penthouse. He told the driver to take him to his attorney's office on Madison Avenue instead. He wasn't ready to sit in that quiet apartment. Not tonight. By the time he walked into the conference room, it was past 9. 3 attorneys were already there, jackets off, sleeves rolled up. Eleanor's will spread across the glass table under harsh ceiling lights. Outside the windows, Manhattan looked the same as it always did. Bright, indifferent. This is personal, Nathaniel said, pacing instead of sitting. She set this up to punish me. There has to be a way to challenge it. His lead attorney skimmed another page before looking up. The trust is irrevocable. It was funded before her death. Everything appears properly executed. She wasn't thinking clearly. He snapped. Bennett got into her head. The attorney held his gaze. Do you have evidence of that? He didn't answer. His phone kept vibrating against the table. Investors. 2 board members. A message from Camille. He flipped the phone face down. We file an injunction, he said. Stop the transfer. Freeze it. The attorney leaned back slightly. If we do that, all of this becomes public. The affidavit, the documentation, everything. He stared at her. You'll be arguing in open court that your late wife fabricated evidence of an affair? She added quietly. Are you prepared for that? The word affair hung there longer than he liked. Across town, the story was already moving, quietly. People talking, questions forming, a leadership change framed as governance review. His phone buzzed again. This time, he looked. From the CFO, emergency board vote tomorrow, interim CEO discussion. Nathaniel felt something shift in his chest. Not panic exactly. Something colder. They wouldn't move that fast, he said. They can, his attorney replied. You don't hold the voting majority anymore. He sat down finally. He'd spent years controlling rooms like this, negotiating, directing, deciding. Now he was the one reacting. He looked at Eleanor's signature again. Clean, steady. This isn't finished, he said, though it sounded less certain than he intended. No one argued with him. They didn't need to. The meeting started right on time. Of course it did. This company ran on precision. Nathaniel got there early, mostly so he wouldn't have to walk in under anyone's stare. He chose a navy suit that morning. Not black. Black looked like mourning. Navy looked like business. Camille came in a few minutes later. She didn't sit next to him. That small detail hit harder than he expected. People took their seats quietly. No small talk. Papers were already laid out. Bennett sat at the far end, in hands folded like he had nowhere else to be. The interim CEO vote was item 1, straight to it. Before anyone could start the usual polite back and forth, Camille spoke. There's something you need to hear. Nathaniel turned toward her, annoyed more than worried. She set her phone on the table, pressed play. His voice came through the speakers. Calm, confident, familiar. Once Eleanor is out of the way, the structure changes. You'll have equity, I promise. It didn't echo. It didn't need to. It just sat there in the room. Nathaniel stood up. That's out of context. Camille didn't look at him right away. I recorded it, she said, for my own protection. Protection from what? His voice was sharper now. She finally met his eyes. From you changing your mind. A board member shifted in his chair. So there was an arrangement. Nathaniel didn't answer. He couldn't without digging deeper. Legal counsel cleared her throat. This supports the affidavit already submitted? Camille's composure started to crack. I didn't think it would end up here. Bennett didn't raise his voice. That's rarely how consequences work. The chairman called for the vote. No speeches, no drama. Hands went up, one by one. Nathaniel scanned the room, searching for hesitation. Loyalty. Something. Nothing. Effective immediately, you are removed as CEO pending review. The words were clean. Administrative. Nathaniel stayed standing a moment longer, then sat down slowly. Across the table, Camille understood what had just happened. She thought the recording would secure her future. Instead, it erased it. By noon, the story had leaked. It didn't explode all at once. It started with a financial blog, 3 short paragraphs about a leadership restructuring at Whitman and Rowe Capital. Then another outlet picked it up, then another. By 3 p.m., the words misconduct and fiduciary breach were circulating on major business networks. Nathaniel watched it unfold from his office, though technically it was no longer his. The brass nameplate had not yet been removed from the door. His phone rang constantly, investors asking careful questions, a senator's aide requesting clarification before an upcoming infrastructure deal, a hedge fund manager saying they would temporarily reassess exposure. Temporarily, on the trading screen mounted across the wall, Whitman and Rowe's stock dipped 5%, then 8%. By market close, 12%. Not catastrophic, but noticeable. Reputation moved markets faster than numbers did. Across town, Camille sat in her own office, staring at an email from Human Resources. Subject: immediate administrative leave. The language was clinical, neutral. Pending internal investigation. Her company access had already been restricted. She opened social media on instinct. It was worse there. Industry commentators dissected timelines, compared hotel dates, reposted old gala photos with new captions. A photo from the plaza resurfaced. Nathaniel speaking, Eleanor smiling beside him, Camille just behind them in white. The comments section was merciless. Calculated. Heartless. Corporate betrayal. Camille closed the app. Her phone buzzed. Nathaniel. She let it ring. Minutes later, a notification appeared from her bank. A pending luxury condo purchase in Tribeca, under Nathaniel's personal guarantee, had been flagged. Financing paused. The future she thought was secured felt suddenly fragile. Back in the boardroom, Judge Bennett addressed the press briefly. Our priority is stability for the company and protection of the Whitman children's interests. The Whitman children. Not Nathaniel. By evening, analysts were already discussing a new era for the firm. Nathaniel stood alone in his office as staff quietly removed personal items from his desk. He had spent years building an empire. It took less than a day for it to begin building without him. The penthouse had never felt this large. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Central Park in pale winter light, but the view no longer impressed anyone. It only reminded Nathaniel of what he was losing. Boxes lined the hallway. Not movers, discretion. A private service, quiet and efficient. Personal items first. Framed awards, crystal trophies, photos from groundbreaking ceremonies, a Forbes magazine cover mock-up that had never quite made it to print. The board had voted to suspend his housing allowance pending final review. The apartment technically belonged to the company's executive benefit structure, another clause he had signed years ago without reading too closely. His attorney had called that morning. "Given the margin loans against your personal shares," she said carefully, "you may need to liquidate assets to stabilize exposure." Liquidate assets. The word sounded clinical, almost harmless. In reality, they meant selling the penthouse. Nathaniel stood in the nursery doorway. 3 cribs, soft gray walls, a mobile still hanging above one crib, untouched. The babies remained in the hospital's neonatal wing, under observation. "Stable," the nurse had repeated earlier. "Stable." He walked over and rested a hand on the edge of one crib. He hadn't held them yet. Press obligations, legal calls, damage control. He told himself there would be time. In the living room, the television played a business network on mute. A scrolling headline read, "Whitman and Rowe enters governance transition amid internal review." Governance transition. He picked up a framed photograph from the console. Eleanor at the Plaza Gala. Calm, composed, looking directly at the camera. Looking now, almost knowing. His phone buzzed. Camille. He let it ring once, twice. Then he answered. "We need to talk," she said. He closed his eyes briefly. "There's nothing left to discuss." Silence stretched between them. "You said you would protect me," she whispered. He looked around the emptying penthouse. "I can't even protect myself." When the call ended, he stood alone in the quiet. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the life he curated was being packed into boxes, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to be left behind. The video arrived a week after the funeral. No announcement, no build-up. Just an email with a simple subject line, "For my children." Bennett made it clear it would be watched all the way through. They met in a smaller conference room this time. No media, no assistants hovering by the door. Just the board, legal counsel, and Nathaniel sitting farther down the table than he used to. When the screen came on, Eleanor was there in the nursery. Same rocking chair, same soft light behind her. She looked pale, tired in a way makeup couldn't hide, but steady. "If you're watching this," she said, "then my babies made it here, and I didn't." No theatrics, no music, just her voice. "I need you to know you were wanted, more than anything." Nathaniel stared at the table while she talked about the kind of people she hoped her children would become. Decent, brave, the kind who keep their word even when it's inconvenient. At one point, she said almost casually, "Money helps, but it doesn't fix character." A few people shifted in their seats. Then she drew a breath and looked straight into the camera. "I also know some adults may be watching this." That got Nathaniel's attention. "If choices were made that hurt our family," she continued. "I didn't answer with anger. I answered with preparation. No raised voice, no bitterness, just fact. My children deserve stability. They deserve leadership that understands loyalty." The room felt smaller somehow. "This wasn't revenge," she added. "It was protection." Near the end, she rested her hand over her stomach and smiled softly. "Be better." And that was it. The screen went black. No one clapped. No one moved for a few seconds. Bennett finally spoke. "The trust stands." Chairs scraped. People filed out quietly. Nathaniel stayed seated. "Be better." It didn't sound like condemnation. It sounded like she still believed he could, and that hurt more than anything else. 2 months later, Whitman and Rowe Capital looked different, not from the outside. The logo still gleamed in brushed steel in the lobby. The trading screens still flashed numbers. The Park Avenue address hadn't changed, but inside, the tone had. The board appointed Michael Whitman, Eleanor's older brother, as interim CEO under the supervision of the family trust. Michael wasn't flashy. He didn't give long speeches or chase headlines. He'd spent years managing infrastructure projects quietly in Chicago, far from Manhattan galas and magazine covers. On his first day, he removed the oversized portrait of Nathaniel from the executive hallway. He replaced it with a simple framed mission statement Eleanor had drafted years ago. Build with integrity. Protect what you create. Investors noticed the shift. Quarterly calls became less theatrical, more transparent. Debt exposure was reduced. Risky expansion into Beverly Hills was paused. The company refocused on core assets, transportation hubs, municipal partnerships, long-term contracts. The stock stabilized. Then it began to climb. Financial analysts described the transition as measured and restorative. In the neonatal wing, the triplets were gaining weight steadily. Nurses often commented on how frequently Michael visited. He asked questions, took notes, held each baby carefully, as if memorizing their faces. Nathaniel visited too, but now he signed in like any other guest. No special access, no executive badge. One afternoon, he stood in the corridor as Michael emerged from the room holding one of the babies. "They're stronger every day," Michael said calmly. Nathaniel nodded. For a moment, neither man mentioned the company. Inside the boardroom weeks later, Bennett reviewed the trust's quarterly update. Performance exceeds projections, he noted. The empire had not collapsed. It had recalibrated. Eleanor's structure, once questioned, now looked deliberate, strategic, protective. Whitman and Rowe was no longer driven by ambition alone. It was anchored by something steadier. And slowly, quietly, the future began to grow in different hands. Camille left Manhattan on a gray Tuesday morning. No reporters, no dramatic exit. Just a car to the airport and 2 oversized suitcases she'd packed herself. The quiet was almost unsettling. A few weeks ago, her name had been everywhere. Now it was like the city had already moved on. The Tribeca condo deal officially fell through the day before. Financing pulled. Deposit frozen while lawyers sorted things out. The boutique advisory firm that once bragged about recruiting her released a short statement about maintaining distance from recent developments. That was it. Years of networking reduced to a paragraph. She booked a one-way flight to Chicago. Her mother picked her up at O'Hare. No lecture, no interrogation. Just a long look that said more than questions would have. Back in her childhood bedroom, everything felt smaller. The debate trophies were still lined up on the shelf. Certificates in cheap frames. Proof that she had always been driven. Focused. Hungry. Late that night, she scrolled through her phone. The silence there felt different. Heavier. Nathaniel hadn't called. Not once in 3 days. Contacts who used to answer within minutes now didn't respond at all. One recruiter sent a careful message suggesting she take some time before re-entering executive leadership. Take some time. It sounded polite. It felt like exile. She opened an article about Whitman and Rowe's rebound under Michael Whitman. Analysts praised the return to disciplined governance. There was a photo of Eleanor again. Calm, composed, almost untouchable now. Camille closed the app. She'd believed she was stepping into something bigger. A life with better views, better rooms, better company. Instead, she'd tied herself to a promise built on someone else's marriage. A few weeks later, she accepted part-time consulting work for a small logistics startup outside Chicago. No assistant, no car service, just conference calls and spreadsheets. One afternoon, her mother asked quietly, "Was it worth it?" Camille didn't answer. She thought about the recording, about pressing play. She had wanted leverage. Instead, she got consequences. That night, she deleted Nathaniel's number. No ceremony. Just done. 3 months after everything fell apart, Nathaniel stood in the neonatal unit with a plastic visitor badge clipped crookedly to his jacket. He wasn't used to waiting rooms or badges. A nurse glanced at his name, gave a small nod. "They're doing well. You can head in." That was it. No deference, no special tone. Inside, the lights were low. The machines made that steady hospital sound. Soft beeping, air moving through vents. The incubators were still there, but most of the wires were gone. Progress. He scrubbed his hands at the sink longer than necessary. Bought himself a few extra seconds. The first baby was awake. Eyes open. Just staring at nothing in particular. At him, maybe. "I'm your dad," he said under his breath, and immediately felt foolish. She blinked like he hadn't spoken at all. He checked the other two. Tiny fingers, slow breaths, oblivious to board votes and headlines and lawyers arguing over percentages. Michael walked in carrying a folder. Of course he did. Even here. "They might discharge them next week," Michael said, calm as ever. Nathaniel nodded. "I'll bring them home." Michael hesitated. Not dramatic, just honest. "The trust will handle housing. We'll find something suitable." Suitable. The penthouse was gone. Sold quietly after the margin calls came in and the numbers stopped cooperating. Nathaniel had signed those papers too. He stared at the babies for a long moment. "I didn't plan this," he said. It sounded weak even to him. Michael didn't rush to comfort him. "Planning isn't the same as responsibility." That landed. A nurse stepped forward and lifted one of the babies into Nathaniel's arms. He stiffened, afraid he'd hold her wrong. She made a small sound, then relaxed against his chest. She was heavier than he expected. Warm. Real in a way nothing else had felt lately. He looked down at her face. No judgment there. No history. Just need. For once, there was no deal to close, no angle to manage. "I'll figure it out," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. And this time, nobody was watching. 3 years passed more quietly than anyone expected. Whitman and Rowe Capital no longer made headlines for scandal. It appeared instead in business journals under phrases like disciplined expansion and family trust governance model. Michael Whitman officially transitioned from interim to permanent CEO after unanimous board approval. The trust retained majority control on behalf of the children. The triplets turned 3 on a bright spring afternoon in Central Park. There was no extravagant media event. Just close friends, a few board members who had become something closer to extended family, and a modest picnic beneath blooming cherry trees. 3 small cakes, 3 sets of candles. Nathaniel stood a few feet away at first, uncertain where he fit. His life looked very different now. A smaller apartment on the Upper West Side. No driver. Consulting work on short-term infrastructure advisories, nothing that put him back in control of an empire. But he never missed a visitation weekend. The trust agreement allowed structured parental access, supervised in the beginning, gradually expanding as stability was demonstrated. He had complied with every condition: financial disclosures, counseling, governance separation, not because lawyers demanded it, because he understood now what was at stake. One of the boys ran toward him, slightly unsteady on grass. "Daddy!" The word hit him harder than any board vote ever had. He knelt and opened his arms. Behind him, Michael watched quietly. Not suspicious anymore, just observant. Judge Bennett, older now, leaned on his cane nearby, satisfied but watchful. The company's annual report that year opened with a dedication page, in simple text, "In honor of Eleanor Whitman Rowe. Vision with integrity. Protection with love." The empire she built had endured. The children she protected were thriving. Nathaniel lifted his son and joined the others around the picnic blanket. He no longer owned the company. He no longer controlled the future. But as three small voices laughed in the sunlight, he realized something unexpected. For the first time in his life, he was earning his place, not inheriting it. 5 years after Eleanor's death, the hospital wing where she had given birth looked different. A polished plaque hung near the entrance. The Eleanor Whitman Family Maternity Center, established by the Whitman Children's Trust below it. Smaller lettering, for mothers who give everything. The trust had funded expanded maternal care, hemorrhage prevention research, and support programs for high-risk pregnancies. Quiet investments, no grand press conference, just long-term commitment. Michael stood beside the triplets, now tall enough to read their mother's name aloud. "That's Mommy," one of them said softly. Nathaniel stood a few steps back. He no longer flinched at the plaque. He no longer tried to rewrite the past. He had rebuilt something smaller but steadier, consulting honestly, living modestly, showing up consistently. He attended school recitals, parent meetings, weekend park outings, not because a trust required it, because he wanted to. Camille, far from Manhattan, had built her own consulting practice in Chicago. No luxury headlines, no shortcuts. She spoke occasionally at business ethics panels about risk, reputation, and the cost of ambition without boundaries. No one applauded wildly, but people listened. Whitman and Rowe Capital continued to grow under disciplined leadership. The trust structure became a case study in corporate governance programs at Wharton and Columbia, not as revenge, as foresight. On the anniversary of Eleanor's passing, the family gathered privately at Central Park. No photographers. Just 3 children releasing white balloons into a pale blue sky. Nathaniel knelt beside them. "Your mother was brave," he said, "and she loved you more than anything." One of the girls looked up at him. "Are you brave too?" He paused. "I'm trying to be." Above them, the balloons drifted higher, small against the skyline. Eleanor had lost her life, but she had not lost her voice. Her protection held. Her children were secure. And the man who once thought power defined him learned that legacy is built not by control, but by character. And just like that, the story comes to an end. But if you're still here with me right now, that tells me something. It means this wasn't just another drama to you. Something in Eleanor's story touched you. Maybe it reminded you of betrayal, or regret, or the quiet strength it takes to rebuild when everything falls apart. This story isn't really about money or power. It's about responsibility. About the truth that what we build on ego eventually collapses, but what we build on character lasts. As the old Stoic idea goes, we don't control what happens to us, only how we respond. Eleanor chose preparation over revenge. Nathaniel learned that intent doesn't erase impact, and in the end, healing came not from winning, but from becoming better. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Protection is love in action. Integrity is quiet strength. And growth often comes after consequences. So let me ask you, what in your life needs protection? What needs courage instead of anger? If this story meant something to you, don't just scroll away. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to the channel so we can keep exploring stories that remind us who we really are. I'm glad you stayed. This story is a fictional drama created for storytelling and educational purposes, while it reflects real-life themes such as corporate governance, family conflict, trust law, and personal accountability. The characters, company names, and events are entirely imagined. Any resemblance to real individuals, organizations, or situations is purely coincidental. The narrative is designed to explore emotional consequences, ethical decision-making, and the long-term impact of integrity versus ambition. It does not promote harm, exploitation, or misinformation about real businesses or people. Financial, legal, and medical elements mentioned in the story are simplified for narrative clarity and should not be interpreted as professional advice. The goal of this content is to provide meaningful entertainment, encourage reflection, and highlight the importance of responsibility, character, and personal growth.